Some years back, when my parents were aging but not wanting too much help, I visited them in Washington, D.C. very regularly. My visit often allowed my sister, who did the lion's share of the caregiving, to get away for a few days. I would house sit and use her car, and since I had grown up in Washington, I was generally confident that I knew my way around, sort of. Anyway, it was very early on a Sunday morning. I had just dropped my sister off at a metro station, and I was tooling home in her car on a nearly empty parkway, which winds through the DC suburbs, when I rounded a corner and saw ahead of me a very young child, alone, on the verge, wearing PJs and slippers, and looking like she was about to step into the road. I slowed, and I saw that she was wailing. I pulled over, opened the passenger door to talk to her. She immediately climbed right in and began frantically to tell me a story in a confused mix of Jamaican lilt and 5-year-old lisp, the gist of which, I gathered, was that she had awakened to hear the garage door opening and found her mommy driving off without her. And she had run and run and run, but lost sight of the car, and now she was alone. Her mommy was gone. That much was very clear. There was no one else in sight. I knew that behind the trees on that parkway was a village of all alike condos. And she thought that's where she probably lived, but she didn't know her address. She did know her name and that she was 5 years old. I told her that I thought we should call our friends at 911 to help us, and I whipped out my cell phone. What is my emergency? Well, I found a 5-year-old alone on an empty street. She's lost. I'm not lost, wailed the child. I just don't know how to get home. Right, I said. She's not lost, but she doesn't know her address. Yes, ma'am, said the operator. We can send officers out to you. And where are you located? I said. I'm not sure. I'm on the road that runs to the metro station, and then realizing I didn't even remember the name of that particular station. Sorry, I don't live around here. Yes, ma'am, she said again. And what kind of car are you driving? Oh, I said. I'm sorry. It's my sister's car. It's a brown SUV sort of a thing. Who's lost? I thought, embarrassed. This little girl who says she's not lost but doesn't know how to get home? Or me, who knows how to get home but can't describe where she is? Well, to make a long story short, I was instructed to carefully drive to the next intersection and read the street signs. Duh. And then told that an officer would soon be there. This very self-possessed 5-year-old and I whiled away the time taking pictures of each other and various pretty things outside of her car with my cell phone. That was her idea. The officer arrived and took her off to look around the neighborhood for her house or her mommy, whichever came first. I gave her a high five for doing such a good job of getting help when she needed it, and went on my way, limp with relief and still embarrassed. And thinking about what it actually means to be lost. Are you lost if you don't know where you are? Are you lost if you don't know how to get where you want to go? Or is lostness not knowing where you want to go? Well, all those could be considered lostness. And lostness is not confined to city streets or even misplaced steps in the wilderness. Anxiety provoking, even dangerous as that kind of loss can be, the really painful kind of loss is more abstract than that. Lost in a maze of circumstances is worse. Lost in your life is harder still. And worst of all, I suppose, is I lost myself. There are lots of ways to get lost in life. When high school doesn't work, when we graduate from college realizing that we're not going to make it in the field of our major, That happened to me. A relationship or a marriage breaks up, the one on which we'd pinned all of our hopes. Or a job ends, or addictions take over, or the last child leaves home, or we retire and realize suddenly that we do not know what to do with ourselves. Or we experience a betrayal or a failure of someone who's supposed to take care of us to do so. Suddenly we feel lost in a hostile world. And in spite of the fact that we almost universally think when things like this happens that they shouldn't happen to us, then they happen to most of us at least a few times in our lives. Being lost is a painful place to be, but it's a nearly universal experience. The poet Dante wrote about it in the prologue to the Inferno. Midway on our life's journey, I found myself in the dark woods, the right road lost. To tell about those woods is hard, so tangled and rough and savage that thinking of it now, I feel the old fear stirring. Have you been there? So have I. A couple of times in the really dark woods and a few more times skirting the edge, and in spite of a blessed and lucky and privileged life, it's a sinking feeling. But like many other things that don't feel too good but have their useful consequences, being lost is not all bad. If the path we've been on ends abruptly or peters out over time, getting narrower and more constraining, we have no choice but to strike out in a new direction, hoping that we will soon cross a new and better path for ourselves and our lives, or we'll soon discover a new and better destination to head for, or at the very least, we will discover where we are and how we got there. But if any good is to come of it, we have to realize that we are lost. When our son was very young, on camping trips, we used to play a little safety game that we called, "Uh-oh, I'm lost." We'd wander around in the woods for a while, getting a little disoriented, and as soon as we were out of sight of anything familiar, little Kevin would announce grandly, "Uh-oh, I'm lost." "Oh dear," I would say, "what should we do?" "Hug a tree," he'd yell with glee, and we'd make a beeline for the nearest tree, give it a hug, and sit down against its friendly trunk. We'd talk about how we were going to wait by this friendly tree until we could hear someone calling for us, a long time if necessary, because this tree is our friend, and so on and so on. We played this game because we knew that the real danger of being lost in the wilderness is that the child or the adult will keep on moving around and become impossible to find. Hug a tree is a good thing to remember when you realize you are lost in the maze of life. Because the real danger in these kinds of times, when all that was settled in our lives is suddenly not settled, is not that you will encounter a tiger or fall over a cliff. The real danger is that you will wander forever, refusing to acknowledge your lostness or anxiously rushing around, making it all the harder to be found. The reason we had Kevin say out loud, "Uh-oh, I'm lost," was to normalize that state, make it easier to admit when it actually happens. Lostness is a normal state in life. Unpleasant as it is, when we can admit it to ourselves, we are more likely to find ourselves again. And the second part of the game was to hug a tree. That is to say, stop rushing around. Because as that little girl I found on the street had already figured out, if you don't know where you're supposed to be, you're not going to be able to get there by all the walking in the world. So you stop and get help. If you're 5 and lost on the street, you wait for a car and you make your distress known. If you're 7 or 27 and lost in the woods, you hug a tree, force yourself to stop and wait for rescue. If you're 67 and lost in the landscape of retirement, you sit down in your easy chair and start thinking about your life and what you really want from it. Hug a tree is countercultural in our activity-based mindset. We want to do something when we are anxious and upset. But the something that we should do is to stop and ponder our situation. Talking to friends, circles of trust, therapists, and advisors can all be a part of our pondering. Journals and meditation practice and even long walks in the woods are all ways of stopping when we realize we've lost ourselves or our beliefs or our purpose in life. And after we've stopped, we want to remember and appreciate those trees that are still in our lives even when we're lost, all that is rooted and sheltering and stalwart. I don't know what I would have done without my friends, people tell me as they are recovering from being lost. When my career ended, I felt like I lost myself, they say. But I realized that I still had a strong belief in my life and that my life had a purpose, and I went on until I found it. I got some help in therapy, they say. For a while, that hour anchored my whole week. Friends, beliefs, purpose, helping professionals can all be the trees that we hug when we are lost. Those who are lost in the woods can anticipate rescue from a search and rescue team, especially if they have prudently left their plans with someone who knows when they should be home and will call for help. It's a little more complicated when we're lost in life, because it's likely that we're going to have to be at least a part of being our own rescuer as we find a new purpose, put our lives together after a great loss, or recover from an illness that has derailed us. So Hug a Tree only goes so far, but it gives us 3 first crucial steps. Acknowledge that you're lost, a normal if unpleasant state. Stop rushing around, and accept the help you need from the sturdy and sheltering sources in your life. It's not only individuals that can get lost. Institutions, nations, families, churches, they can all get lost too. Our nation at the moment, it seems to me, has lost sight of where it wants to be going. Some big tech companies lost sight of human values. We're all paying the price. Congregations were so often getting lost in the period between the end of one ministry and the beginning of another that the interim ministry was born in the 1980s. So much for being lost, a common but straightforward state. Being found, though, that's a different matter. Because if it's just a matter of getting our act together, we probably weren't as lost as we imagined we were. When we're really, really lost, we do need that search and rescue team, that therapist, that just right book, or the kindness of the neighbors to whom we had never had the courage to speak. Being found, in other words, seems to take something special, something either from outside of ourselves or from so far inside that it seems amazing that we found it when we needed it. It doesn't just seem like the therapist helped, you see. It seems like that one person was an undeserved and unexpected lifeline into our new life. It doesn't just seem like we read the right book at the right time. It seems like that book came into our hands by such remarkable coincidence, it's spooky. It's not just that we think somebody loves us. It's that the little girl we'd found on the playground is moved to say, "We all love Mr. Hatch," just at the right moment to get the crowd moving. Getting out of the dark woods, or down from a dangerous mountain, or out of serious trouble does not seem like a mundane process. It seems to have a little magic. The religious world names that little magic grace, an undeserved blessing that comes at just the right moment, a lifeline to grab, an insight that wells up from deep inside, just when we needed it, from God or the universe or life, but definitely, it seems, not from us. There are many theories about how grace works. From the zap that Father God sends to the nudging we sometimes get to dig a little deeper for our own strength. Humanist grace tends to come from the humans around us who care or listen or offer their wisdom or lend us a hand. Grace is one of those religious words which has to be redefined for different theologies because there's no real secular alternative. For most people who find themselves back outside that dark wood, luck and coincidence and serendipity don't quite describe the sense they have of being helped out. Grace is an undeserved gift of love. From God, if we lean that way, from others, we all know that happens. Even from the universe, which many of us believe as an arc which bends towards love, as well as an arc which bends towards justice. Something like that is a part of being found, along with our own willingness to admit we were lost and the strength and wisdom we bring all by ourselves to our situation. And sometimes being found requires a little more, a little shove from love, which is grace. And when you get that, it is truly amazing.